For more content and training on telling personal story, go to ramiro.me/show. Story Legacy at ramiro.me, a show for people who want to tell their story, make an impact, and leave a legacy. Personal stories from people just like you who have gone through tough shit and came out with a story to tell. I am Ramiro, creator of Story Legacy, your story god. And today on the show, we have from Texas, Cali Castle.
I love it. Thank you so much, Ramiro. I love the energy. I feel like I'm at a hyped up live event right now. This is great.
Hey Kelly, yeah, thank you for coming on and welcome. So I'd like to get started and dive deep right away. And one of the opening questions I like to ask is for you: what has been one of the biggest challenges that you have faced and gone through thus far?
That is such a wonderful question. And for me, my biggest challenge in life has been so I'll start from here and I'll give my answer in somewhat of a story format since we are on this a story-based podcast. Um, I knew when I was a little kid what I wanted to do. I was so drawn to music since the time I was really little. I started in dance, basically whenever I could walk, and that led to always having the music in my ear. I can remember, and we even had like a record player in our dance studio where my teacher would play the old school records. So I had the Tchaikovsky ballets playing in my head, and different popular classical music already in my ear. And as soon as I could play or pick an instrument in sixth grade band, um, I ended up picking the bassoon at instrument tryout night. I had seen all of the instruments when they came and performed for us at school in fifth grade. And I remember seeing the bassoon and loving the low tones because they felt so grounding to listen to. And when I went to try instruments, I couldn't play the flute to save my life. I really wanted to. And I also really wanted to play percussion, and my parents said no. So that left this funny instrument that I was able to get my fingers around because I was a tall, skinny kid, and I could make a sound on it. I fit the profile. They kind of profile you for the different instruments. And they said, here you go. This is the thing that you're going to play. So I ended up choosing the bassoon and became very good at it very quickly. And had this natural talent and ability at it and loved it. I was actually a kid who practiced and didn't need to be told to practice. I actually enjoyed it. So fast forwarding through all the years, it was time to go to college, and I had a choice between chemical engineering and music. I got into school for both, and when I was accepted into the Eastman School of Music, as well as several other very high-ranking music schools in the US, I said, I'm doing this. This is my time. I have to. So what has been interesting through my life and my biggest challenge is that I've always had this guiding light as to a general theme in kind of the direction that I should be going, whether it be music, whether it be music production, live event production. But I have a tendency to get scattered and want to learn 1,000 different things at once. And I will stretch myself too thin and get really burnt out. Um, and that doesn't leave you anywhere, right? That's kind of a lose lose for everyone. So, my biggest challenge has been focusing on one to maybe three. Let's put a cap at three. Just focusing on a handful of things at a time, especially since I got out of school in the last couple of years, and just dedicating my time to a couple of things, especially when it comes to building a business. Um, you have to have a financial stability piece to keep you going, right? But you also want to have time and effort and energy to explore your true passions and to learn and to
Mm.
grow. So that is my biggest challenge in my life.
Well, I find that interesting. So you say focus has been the biggest challenge, and then, but at the same time, you've always had this guidance, this north star of what you wanted. You wanted music, and yet still, to focus on that, well, to listen to that, that has been the biggest challenge.
Well, okay, keep in mind the North Star is just like someone who's going on a journey. Let's say the three wise men when they were going towards Jesus the night he was born,
Uh
right?
huh.
That's always the image that I have in my head. Um,
Okay.
they kind of knew the direction they were going, but they didn't know the obstacles that they were going to overcome. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
know the challenges, the what's the word I'm looking for? Things that would entice their attention elsewhere, perhaps.
The
Um,
shiny objects along
yeah,
the way. Got it. Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so I would say that I always have had this strong North Star, but it's a pulling feeling. It's doesn't come with instructions.
Okay. So, what have been some of the shiny objects along the way? For example, you mentioned chemical engineering and music, and I relate with that because in my background, just academic, I've done so many different things, or in sports, even music, so many different things, and people go like, "But wait, that's something completely different." And nowadays, I'm embracing that more. But then, chemical engineering, was that also one of your passions, one of your callings, or was that just a shiny object that was distracting you from your North Star?
I will say that at times I think that there's a lot of value in going and exploring your interests. And especially at the end of high school, when you are just starting to figure out the direction where you're going to go, at that time, pursuing the mathematical and pursuing mathematics and science, let's say like a career as an engineer, it would have been a really good career path, right? I probably would have been making a
Mm-hmm.
lot more money at this point in my life had I gone that direction. When I was a senior in high school, there was a program at my school called Independent Study and Mentorship. So for a year in that class, I was able to go out into my community and mentor with a chemical engineer for a year. And it didn't take a whole lot of my time, right? I was still doing all of
Mm-hmm.
my other things. But I did get to put at least a year's worth of effort into it to see if it was going to be something I wanted to pursue long term.
Mm.
And I've gone through this process several times throughout my career in the last decade, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would also say that in the modern times, if you want to pursue a career as an artist and you
Mm-hmm.
want to actually make money doing this,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to have a lot of skills and entrepreneurship skills
Mm.
that perhaps prior to 2000, let's say, artists didn't necessarily need to have. What's amazing is there are so many more avenues for artists to collect revenue from the things that they do nowadays. Um, but you have to wear a lot of hats as an artist, right? So, what I'm referring to in the early days of my career when I finished school and I moved out to LA, um, I had realized in school that I was going to need to have these sorts of skills. I am a classical musician, so if I want to perform for a living, there's kind of two routes. I could go and get into an orchestra, which is an extremely competitive and also very expensive process to go through to actually win a job.
Okay.
And I just couldn't see myself doing that long term. So instead, there's the other life as a freelancer. And when I went and visited LA in grad school, I saw that this could be a really good life for me and I'd really enjoy it. And I thought that I'd love living in LA. So I moved out there. And in my time in LA, I realized I'm probably not going to make all of my money just performing.
Mm-hmm.
I also taught, I performed, and kind of again through that process of learning, trying out things, and exploring, I found a niche for myself in producing special projects for artists. But there's definitely a story of kind of how that all came to be.
Oh wow, interesting. All right, cool. Then I love that how you say that the shiny objects you really allow that space and dive and take that opportunity to really see if it will be explore and to see if it's be a good fit. Like that mentorship in the engineering field, you took a whole year to kind of shadow like an apprentice, someone in that field to see if it'd be a good fit for you or not, right? So that you have really considered and experienced the will it fit me, will it fit you? And so one of the things is, all right, we're going into the whole music route now. uh, so you and I have connected before. We've had a conversation before, and you know, I've gotten feedback from listeners wanting to know if we have connected before. So that's why I mentioned that. And actually, so for season 2 of this show, it will be the music edition where it's focused on musicians and their story. It's the first time I'm mentioning this on the show right here, and so I definitely want to have you come back on that for season 2 in the musician's journey, and then maybe we get deeper into that. Maybe we'll still get deeper into that here, but one of the things we had connected on as well is that you mentioned that really how you love the topic of listening, right? So we can get into that. Let's look. Let me look for a sec to see where we're gonna go from here. So you mentioned that the story of the going into different avenues of making money and being a producer for special projects. All right, we could go into that, but right now I want to play and be flexible and open. Where do you want to go? Do you want to go into that story of, you said there's a story behind that, how you made money from performing, from teaching, and from producing. And you said there's a story behind that. We could go into that. We could save that for the season 2 episode. Or we could go into listening right now. What do you want to do at this point?
I would love to talk a little bit about listening, and maybe we can give people a taste of more of what we're going to talk about in the second season.
Go. Great. So listening, why are you so passionate and so obsessed with that topic? And how would you describe it? What's the importance of it? And how do you practice it?
Yes. Okay. So first, we have to put up some definitions. So
Yeah,
there's the
let's see.
definition of hearing, and there's the definition of listening.
All right.
Hearing is defined as when sound comes into your ears and your body recognizes vibrations and translates them into what your ear can hear.
Mm-hmm.
Listening is taking those sounds and analyzing it or interpreting it to have meaning. So that is the first definition I'd like people to understand.
So hearing is, if I paraphrase and translate, that's the physical act of getting the sound in, and then the listening is what you said, the interpretation, the processing of that sound.
Yes, exactly.
All right, cool. Cool.
Yes. So, what was so interesting going from high school to college for me was that growing up here in Texas, which is now where I am living, I grew up in a really fantastic music education program. And it's funny, I've been working on curriculum for my students, and I have two big filing cabinets over here full of music, and I was going through a lot of my music the other day. I have a lot of my music from my middle school and high school experiences saved. And I realized that one of the reasons that I excelled so quickly and I got to the level that I did by the end of high school was the amount of music that I had played in those 7 years. It was just huge. Like, even looking back, I can't believe the amount of music that I played, from being in
Okay.
orchestras and bands and solo stuff in lessons. So it was just exposure to a lot. So I was trained as a very technical player growing up, but I really didn't have a background or an education in music theory and aural skills, AURAL, which is the interpretation of what you are hearing. So when I got to college, you take a music theory test to determine which class you're going to be placed into, and I got put in the remedial class, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait a second, how do I not know this stuff? I've been doing this for a long time now. But it's just because I had never taken a music theory class. That wasn't offered at my school. So I knew how to play music, but I didn't understand how it was put together. And I really hadn't had training in ear training, in hearing, in listening. So my first year in college, I was really good at music theory because it's very math based, but oral skills were so challenging to me. I think I got back my first dictation and I had only gotten like 25%. It was pretty simple melodies that we had to transcribe. I just remember getting back this page just like full of red and going, oh my goodness. And so I had to get tutoring for the first 2 years in oral skills. And it was really difficult for me. A big part of oral skills training is singing. And that also was something I had never done growing up. Just didn't have an interest in it, didn't care, didn't want to do it. But I realized, wow, this is bumping up my musicality so much because I understand what I'm hearing. I am now getting better at crafting melodies and playing things more musically because I understand what's going on. So my listening skills got so much better in those years. And when I became a teacher and started teaching my students, I made a vow to myself that I was going to teach them music theory and oral skills and make it a core principle for me as a teacher. So now I teach a music theory class to students, and it is very much a performance-based class. You know, when you go to college for music, they're usually two separate classes, music theory and oral skills. But my class is really for anyone who wants to apply the music theory immediately. So we do a lot of singing. We do analysis of the music as well, but we're also training your ear. I'll add a second part to this. Another reason that I am so interested in listening and teaching listening to people is growing up, I would get into let's say, arguments or heated
Uh-huh.
discussions with my dad all the time.
Mhm.
Especially once I decided to become a musician full time. He just didn't quite
Uh-huh.
understand how I was going to make money doing this, right? I'm sure a lot of you out there can relate to having these discussions with your parents saying, I'm going to go and become a full time artist. And they're like, what? What do you mean? How do you do that? um, and I would always feel like my dad and I were just going through this loop and having the same conversation over and over. And I'm like, you're not listening. You're not hearing me. And so that's a little bit different than music, but still listening applies whether you are analyzing and interpreting music or analyzing and interpreting a conversation and emotions between two people. You use a lot of the same skills.
I love that, you talking about you using that example of your dad. You're having this deja vu conversation and you're in that loop. And how did we get here again? Why are we repeating the same patterns? I sometimes have that with my mom. And in that conversation, she asked me a question and then I answer, and then she asked me another question that's unrelated, or she says something, and then I get frustrated sometimes and I go, Mom, you're not listening to me. And then she looks at me, well, are you listening? Like, of course I am. But anyway, that's what it made me think of the conversation and the loops I go into with my mom. And you mentioned first how crucial listening is in music, and then you applied it in conversation, how important it is in conversations with people and relating with people, and to get that emotional information. We'll dive a bit deeper on that in a sec, but before we do, the listening skills for music, the oral skills, right? That is, I have a friend, he has a reggae band. He's been practicing music he's playing music for like 10, 15 years as well. And one of the things, so I feel like I just got started with my vocal training, and I too want to become a vocalist. And I had never really identified and embraced that side of me. And the first class I got in vocals was probably almost a decade ago. It was a bad teacher, and it's like, all right, do this, 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 and I'm trying saying, yeah, you're on, you're off. I'm like, but I don't know what I'm doing. It's like you're asking me to do some moves and make some sounds, but I'm in the dark. I don't hear a difference. And as the years go by, I had another teacher who was a bit better. The basic things, all right, lower, higher. No, you're too low, a bit higher. And I'm like, all right, now I'm starting to feel it and know what I'm doing. And this friend of mine, he emphasized, all right, you're doing your vocal warm-ups, that's good, but one of the core things as a musician is your ability to hear the notes, the melodies, the chords. That is so fundamental. And then when I started using headphones to get the instant feedback during my vocal practice and vocal warm-ups, it made such a huge difference when I got that feedback in my growth and just being it improved my listening and being like on pitch, etc. So for you, for that, how was that like? Because you could play things, but you were very technical, yet your oral skills weren't that developed. So before you got to college, and you got into the remedial class, were you just not aware of that skill or your proficiency in that skill or in your oral skills? How come that was such a big surprise to you?
Sure. So, to answer that question, being a wind instrumentalist is a little bit different than being a vocalist because there are a lot more things we have to pay attention to with how our instrument tunes to others. And I mostly play in ensemble settings. I practice by myself. I may play solos a couple times a year, but I'm mostly playing with others. So I had learned how to tune within an ensemble, right? You know, if you're the root, the third, or the fifth, and how to tune those things. And you hear those things pretty immediately. because you hear the wah 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 wah, right, waves when you're out of tune, and then they sync and they go away when you're in tune. So I knew how to listen for that already. But as you were talking and telling me about what you were first learning, one of the fundamentals of learning oral skills, let's say, is actually learning and memorizing groups of notes and what groups of notes sound like. You know, you can go over to the piano or play a C on your instrument with a tuner in front of you, and you can watch it and find the middle. But tuning is always in relation to another note. And so I had never been taught and memorized. It would be like memorizing the letters and knowing how to put the letters together to make words. But that's with your eyes. And music theory and oral skills is memorizing groups of notes together. So that's where you need to memorize your scales, memorize intervals, and then you start playing around with syncing and making lines of those intervals together, groups together, right? So I just hadn't ever had training in that, and I could recognize some of it because I had played so much music. Um, but especially using my voice was one of the greatest tools and skills that I was given. It just took, I had a huge learning curve because I was not very good at reproducing a tone with my voice. You know, someone would sing la, and I would be like, la. I couldn't match the pitch very well. I didn't know how to control my voice, which was really frustrating at first, right? Because I'm at an extremely high
I
level
feel
on
you.
on my instrument, and I know what I want it to sound like. I can hear it in my head, but reproducing it with my voice was difficult.
You know, you touch upon such an important point. Two things you mentioned. One, the importance of relative pitch, right? The C note and to the interval to an E, and to recognize that interval, and that how important it is to have that distinction between the relationship between the two notes and the distance, right? That is so fundamental. And to me, you're saying that to me now, and I don't know, I've heard that so many times, and through talking with that friend, he really emphasized that, and I was so challenged. I was challenging him, like, really? Is that the most effective way? Does that make sense? And then he shared this teacher who has free videos on YouTube, and I just got that drilled in, the importance of relative pitch. And so when you say that to me now, relative pitch, it's so important. I'm like, yes, of course it is. So, and that actually reminds me, shit, I need to go get started on practicing those and developing those skills even further. So that's just one thing I wanted to emphasize, the importance of relative pitch. And then you mentioned in that also comes memorizing what you hear, right? Because just like how we tune our instrument, we tune our ears, right? And then when we memorize that, and you mentioned the second key part, being able to reproduce that sound with the voice, even though you're not a vocalist, you play a different instrument, it's so crucial, beneficial, helpful. That friend of mine, he plays the keys mostly. He plays some guitar, but keys is his thing. And he told me this exact same thing. First, hearing a tone, being able to memorize it, even though you hear different tones, kind of like anchor it in your memory bank, and then being able to reproduce it. And I believe it makes sense, but still, why is it so important, and what is it so beneficial to be able to reproduce that in vocals?
Yeah.
As an instrumentalist who is not a vocalist, why is that so important?
Yeah. So one of my favorite phrases, and my students probably get tired of hearing me say this, is if you can sing it, you can play it. So I have my students sing their parts before they play their parts a lot of the time, especially if they're having trouble with something, then that's the first thing that we do. So I don't know all of the technical answer for this question, but my hypothesis is that because we are the ones actually physically producing the sound, there is some connection between us producing the sound and our brain that creates neurons up there to fire and wire them together that then makes it more clear and louder in our heads. Because what often happens with instrumentalists, especially with my instrument, I will say, a lot of kids, actually, I would say all of my students who come to me already know how to read music. We really don't have time with the bassoon for me to teach them how to read music because we have to spend so much time just learning how to play this crazy instrument. So what happens with instrumentalists who are reading music all the time, is that they're connecting their eyes to their fingers and they're
Mm.
disconnecting their ear because playing an instrument is such a physical thing. Whereas with your voice, you're the one producing it. You're the instrument. You can feel it. So, with my instrument, um I would love to start a program where I got to start kids in what's called the Suzuki method, which is where kids learn the piano or a string instrument without any
Mhm.
music for several years, just learn
Mm.
things by ear. And I do that with my students from time to time, and we'll learn like scales and basics and warm ups and that sort of thing without music. But because most of my students are already in band, they're connecting their eyes to their fingers and they're disconnecting their ear. So singing is just listening to your ear. We're not putting any music. I'm singing something and they're singing it back to me. They have to use their ears. So I think the answer to that question has a lot to do with how the brain wires all of these connections together.
Yeah, you just sharing that little insight, I could clearly see now. Thank you for sharing that. It gave me an insight on the reason why is first you mentioned when people can sight play, right? They call it
Sight
sightseeing
read,
or sight
yeah.
playing, sight read, right? They see any music and they can play it right away. It's the visuals and then it connects with their body, their hands, how they express it in their instrument. But it is such an external process if it's not if their ear is not tuned into it, and then what happens is if they make a mistake they don't hear it right away, and they don't feel it. And also if the instrument gets out of tune, they might be playing the right note but it's out of tune so it doesn't sound right, but they're not in tune with their earring and with their whole feeling, that they don't recognize it right away, right? And then what happens by singing it, what you mentioned, you really internalize it, you embody, you integrate it, so that when you play it, you really feel it, and it's more a internal expression outwards of just you internally having that song inside and then expressing it on the instrument, whereas that sight reading would just be what you mentioned, this external process. So that's why being able to reproduce the sound through the vocals, even if you're not a vocalist, is so important to integrate
Yes.
it. Wow, beautiful. Thank
And
you. Thank you for that
just
insight. I
something
learned
else,
something.
yeah, something else that comes to mind with this is oftentimes if you ever go out to a jazz club, for example, and there's a jazz
Mm.
keyboardist there, or if
Mm.
you're a Glenn Gould fan and you can go and listen to Glenn Gould CDs on Spotify, you will hear him kind of mumbling and singing along with himself as he plays. And Glenn Gould was famous for playing Bach sonatas and things. So he's doing it with Bach. But oftentimes, jazz pianists are also kind of singing along with themselves. And it's because they're hearing it in their head first. If you
Mm.
are improvising and just making something up Or if you have memorized a big solo of some sort, if you're a violinist, then that music has to live very loudly in your head before it can come
Uh,
out here. So, again, our voice is our own instrument. You should be able to reproduce what's up here with this and then translate it to the physical.
okay, beautiful. Now, great example. And you mentioned your slogan is to your students, if you can sing it, you can play it. Now, how would that translate to a vocalist? If you can sing it, you can sing it?
I guess so. It's oftentimes what I find with singing, singers generally have the opposite problem as wind instrumentalists. Oftentimes we are sharp, and oftentimes vocalists sing a little bit flat and a little bit
Okay.
under. So
Okay.
I know for vocalists, just like it is for us, it's really important to sing with drones or to sing with chords or even someone playing along your part so that you can tune to, or have something to tune to.
Okay, okay. Cool. I love that. Okay, cool. Well, I would probably translate that slogan for vocalists. If you can hear it in your head, you can sing it, something like that.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah,
that's
all
a
right,
good
cool.
one.
All right. Now, I want to transition into the listening aspect where it comes into play in relationships and conversations with people. Now, you talked about being in that conversation deja vu loop with your dad, right? Did you ever get out of it? Did you? And if you did, what's the awareness that brought you out of it, and how did you deal with that? And even if you got out of it, did you sometimes still get back into that loop? How was that experience like?
I would say with my dad, we never quite got there. We did to some extent. He is the first example that comes to mind when I think about that. And this is a journey that I'm really starting on now. The pandemic has forced me to make a career shift because right now it is really difficult to make money as a performer. So I had to find something else to do to fill my time and my income gaps, as I'm sure many people out there who are watching this have done. And so I have turned to astrology and to yoga and to more of the spiritual path. And so just some of the tools I found in those conversations that we each have to take responsibility for ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with my dad, and I mean, with all sorts of relationships that you have in your life, just some of the principles that I use now to have better relationships and to take more responsibility for myself are looking at where I set boundaries. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Looking at when you have big dreams and big ideas that perhaps some people won't understand, knowing when and with whom to share these ideas is really important. So, my dad is an engineer and he is an entrepreneur. He owned two businesses and ran them very successfully. So he does have a engineering mind. I I also found just one of the biggest differences between men and women is when women are talking about what's going on in their life, they just want someone to listen. They just want
Yeah,
to be able
yeah,
to
yeah.
talk and get it out of our bodies. We don't want someone to tell us the solutions to our problems. We just want someone to listen. Whereas men want to like get to the point. They want to find a solution. They want to keep this thing rolling, right? And my dad, being an engineer, wanted to do that even more so. He wanted to fix the problem. And so sometimes when I would be telling him about the things that were going on in my life, the challenges I was having, he wanted to give me a list of solutions that he thought I could use. And I was just saying, Dad, I really appreciate your advice. And I promise you, I will come and ask you for advice when I need it. But right now, I'm just telling you about what's going on just because you asked. So I did find in that relationship in particular, I just had to set boundaries of topics of things that I could talk to him about and give him more details and things that I couldn't.
Oh, I so relate with that. This is what you mentioned, the difference in communication and generalization between men and women is like the basics of men are for Mars, women are for Venus. Is the
Yes.
women just want to express and talk about the events, right? And then the man goes, so what's the problem? Where's the problem? All right, how do we fix it? Is that the point? But wait, I'm listening. So what's the problem? There's no problem. I just want to tell you. Then why are you telling me this? I sometimes have those conversations with brothers of mine, with other men in my life that they go, all right, so what do you want me to do about it? No, nothing. I'm just sharing you what's up. Oh, okay. And then it's like, why did you share that with me? And but all right, okay. This is going a little bit deeper. Is But here's the thing that sometimes frustrates me a little bit is when a woman who wants to express opens the conversation with, "Hey, I've got this problem. I want your advice. What's your opinion?" And then they start talking about it, talking about it, talking about it. They open the conversation with, "I want your opinion. I want your advice. What would you do?" And then when I do give that and deliver, it gets into this whole other conversation where I realize you do not want my advice. You do not want me to solve it. You do not want to solve it yourself. You just want to express it. But them being not aware of that, they just want to express it. They still voice it in that way. They communicate in that way. What's your opinion? Can you help me solve this problem? That gets a whole nother confusing conversation. So coming back to knowing who you have certain conversations with, which topics, the boundaries really helps to avoid certain loops that just drain your energy and lead to nowhere, right? Yeah, cool. All right. So that's one example with your dad. I definitely relate. I used to have that with my mom. I used to have that scenario with my mom. All right, these and so many trials and errors. Okay, what can I talk about? Can I not talk? You ask me about this. Yes, no. Where do we go? Okay, cool. So listening to that, and then how does how did listening really play a role in that relationship and in that conversation? I know I'm focusing on that a lot, but like in those loops, right? How did it really help you to become more aware of it in, for example, setting boundaries? Was it really during the conversation? Was it afterwards? How does that play a role in that?
Sure. So I would say this answer really goes beyond the relationship with my dad.
Mm.
So I went to undergrad. I completed my degree in music performance at Eastman. Then the typical career path of a classical musician is to go on and do your master's degree. It's basically like 2 more years of practice time. That's kind of the purpose of your master's degree before you go out into the real world and figure out what path you're going to take. And in my undergrad degree, I explored entrepreneurship a lot. The Eastman School of Music was the first classical music program to start a arts entrepreneurship program. So I took total advantage of that program and started exploring other career paths besides playing in an orchestra during that time. But when I got to
Mm.
grad school, I really got to explore teaching. I kind of put my entrepreneurship stuff on hold because I knew it was only 2 years, it was going to fly by. The extra time I had outside of school was devoted towards teaching, which was also my income, which was great. So it served two purposes. So up until that point, which I think I graduated grad school at 24, 25, I had very good luck in life of having really big experiences, getting to travel all over the world for music, getting great scholarships to go to school, to go on these adventures. I, through school, always got paid to learn to do something I wanted to learn, like teaching, for
Nice.
example, or I worked for a jazz radio station for a year and a half in college. And so I got to learn what it was like to be a media outlet in entertainment. And I got paid to do that. So, one of my best pieces of advice is try and look for opportunities where you get paid to learn. That's like one of my key check marks on a job. And so through that time, I always felt like things really just flowed in my life. Yeah, of course, there's challenges that come up, and you have a lot of things to do, and you get really tired, and just, all of that kind of stuff. But in general, I didn't have a whole lot of blocks in life. Then I moved out to LA, and that all kinda changed. It was all of a sudden me as the little fish jumping into the giant ocean of Los Angeles, and it was a whole different game to now
Mm.
put together a career and to kinda do it by yourself. Um, and during that time, I took advantage of a lot of opportunities. That's We could kind of bring the conversation back to production and how that ended up happening in my life. Um, but it was not an easy path for sure. And in many ways, I felt like life just didn't flow as easily there for me.
Mm.
And it was 5 years of kind of feeling that way. I think part of it is that in LA, a lot of the work that you do is based on one project at a time, and you kind of jump from project to project. And while I was in Los Angeles, I did work with an artist named Gila Plitman for like 4.5 years, I think it was, from 2016 and through 2020. So like yeah,
Okay.
roughly 3, 4 years. Um, but I never had anything in LA that ended up being a team that worked together consistently, whose objective was to grow that team and grow an organization. Whereas before my time in LA, I always was a part of something like that. And I have come to realize that for myself, that's something that I really want in my work life.
Mhm.
And so I think that that was one of my biggest challenges in LA was I always felt a little bit ungrounded and did get to do a lot of amazing things and work on amazing projects and learning new skills. Um, but um, yeah, for the first time in my life, things weren't going so easily. So, how this ties back to the listening. I realized that I needed to learn some new self self-discovery skills to figure out why I felt so much like tension and stress and anxiety inside. So that's when I really amped up my yoga practice. I developed a really serious yoga practice. I sought out meditation skills. I sought out Kundalini yoga, which was a lifesaver for me, and started looking into the spiritual path. Through college, I had been obsessed with studying entrepreneurs, but the whole self-development like world and industry hadn't really exploded yet until like the late 10s, let's say past 2015 maybe. So it was that time that I really started diving into spirituality and self development.
Oh, nice. Okay, so to sum that up, it was mostly the listening that came from reflecting and going deep, and that came from that experience of things not flowing as easily when you were in LA, where you started to focus on that spiritual path, that personal development, that spiritual growth, and that's a whole the other, yeah, listening. That's listening in that silence, going within. All right, cool, beautiful. Now, a few things you mentioned. So you mentioned also that, especially in LA, just going that entrepreneurial route, it was also very much the freelancer route, where it's more a solopreneur, whereas you're used to and you choose now to work in teams and larger organizations, to have a team and not go the solo route, because that's really what resonates most with you, right? And cool. So then LA, coming back, to focus, and you mentioned now how you're transitioning into astrology and yoga. Well, you had your yoga practices for, you haven't had that for years now, and then now you're transitioning, or you're adding that on. So what, and you mentioned in the beginning, focus has been one of the biggest challenges throughout your life. So what is your current focus now in terms of the astrology, in terms of yoga, and in terms of the your music, as or as
Yeah.
be it a performer or be it teaching?
Hmm. So, right now, with the current situation and landscape, it's all definitely still going with the flow of how life is changing right now in this strange situation that we're in as a global collective. But I am still teaching quite a bit. I have moved my studio completely online, so any bassoonist anywhere in the world can find me and take a lesson with me if they would like. So I'm doing that. So this kind of ties back to what we were just talking about. While I was in LA, aside from teaching and performing, even as a performer, I would get hired by an orchestra or a nonprofit to come and perform. Same thing with all of the production projects that I did. And even a lot of teaching, I'd get hired by like a youth orchestra or something to come and teach. With production, I would always get hired by someone to come and be a producer, assistant producer on a project. But now I have decided it's really time for me to take the reins and build my own business that is my own creation and vortex, essentially. So, my teaching studio, which I have had for many years now, is I have transitioned a little bit to um, this is the first time as a teacher I haven't been associated with a school where I get fed students through a school. Now it's completely up to me to go out into the world and find students, which is exciting. Because I'm really just focusing on a handful of students and students who truly want to learn and dedicate themselves to this beautiful instrument that I love. Um, so a lot of kids end up taking lessons because they're forced to by their band directors, or they kind of just need to learn how to play and get by on the instrument to participate in band. But they're not really interested in pushing themselves to grow as a musician. So I have made the transition with my studio to only accept students who are really serious about learning the instrument. And I'm also currently developing several online courses, including the music theory courses that I've told you about, who will be open to anyone who just wants to become a better musician and a better performer. And if you want to learn the basics of music theory that you can apply to any kind of music, that course is going to be available for you. So those projects are really exciting and fun. Um, I would love to do some chamber music at some point at some point in this next year. There's an organization called Group Muse that connects musicians with people who have homes and living rooms and backyards where they want to have small, intimate concerts. That's actually my favorite kind of concert, anyways. I love
Oh
chamber
wow.
music. I love playing in these intimate settings. So that will probably happen. But just with the pandemic, it's going to take a while for the larger organizations to get back and running. So I'm just not going to focus on that as a primary source of income as I did in the past. But I know it will come back at some point. Um, so to fill in the rest of the gap, during this last year and a half, I studied astrology for fun. And the way I like to explain astrology to people is it is a scientific and artistic language. It is both a science and an art form that combines the science of where the stars and the planets are in the sky with the history and the mythology and the psychology of what it all means to show people a blueprint of their lives and energies that are probably influencing their life. Because it's so similar to music in that way, music is also a very scientific language, but it expresses emotions. Astrology was very easy for me to pick up, and I really enjoyed it and kind of just started doing readings for friends for fun and realized that I had a real talent and knack for it. So I took a couple of courses and read some books. I did about a month of test readings, and now my astrology business is open. And I'm doing readings for people now.
Nice. All right. Where can they reach out to get a reading from you?
Yeah, right now you can go to calendly.com/Kelly Castle. My last name is spelled Kasle, and you can book a reading there.
Cool. Cool. Kelly Castle. All right. Beautiful. Now, so your focus is on transition. That's an exciting transition, and that's one thing you mentioned earlier. Is before you would always be associated with a school, and you were Fed students. You only had to show up and teach. You didn't have to market or sell to get students. You mentioned that you decided to only work with those who were committed and not those who were forced to learn an instrument. And coming back to how you mentioned musicians nowadays, artists, they have to play different roles, wear different hats. They're the artist, but then they have to be the marketer, they have to be the entrepreneur, they have to be the manager, need to have the systems, things with which people don't automatically develop those skills. So it can be a challenge for a lot of artists, and you have that experience from that environment of your dad being an entrepreneur and through what you've learned, paid to learn in that entrepreneurship during your education. So excited. All right. So in that you're developing focus on specific students right now and developing, and also the courses you're developing in, for example, the music theory that's more general for musicians, and also other courses for bassoonists specifically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're expanding to do astrology readings because you just loved it and that was just fun for you. All right, exciting. All right, so you got a bunch of things you're focusing on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have other things that you had to say no to in order to focus on these things?
Ooh. um I will say to that, something that I want to put back into my life at some point is I grew up riding horses competitively. and it's something that I love. It's also a very expensive sport, so I have to have cash and capital to do that again. And so now that I'm back in Texas, that is something that I would love to do again, and that's just for fun. That's not a career thing. And same thing with yoga. If anyone's interested out there, I do a practice called rocket yoga, which is really based on strength and flexibility. And the combination of those two, it's a pretty intense practice, but I love it. So search rocket yoga if you are looking to take your yoga practice to the next level.
So do you mean like rock it or like rocket?
I love that. I'm going to have to tell some of my friends that one. But rocket. So this practice was developed by a man named Larry Schultz in San Francisco at the end of the 20th century. And he was an avid Ashtanga yogi practitioner and practicer. Ashtanga is one of the ancient arts and practices of yoga. There's the primary and secondary, and then I think there's one more series. There's 3 series. Essentially, you do the same practice all the time. But Larry was finding that that practice was not accessible to everyone. So he changed it up just a little bit, keeping the fundamentals, but making it more acceptable or accessible. And also, he was attracting, like, think of yourself in San Francisco in the 1970s and 80s. There were like b-boys on the street and artists, and he was attracting a very artistic crowd. And there's this guy named David Kyle who still continues teaching Larry Schultz's practices, who was a b-boy. And he came in and he could throw all these crazy tricks. He could do handstands and balance on one arm and bend himself in all sorts of ways. And so this practice started attracting kind of like the rock and roll yogis, you could say. And it so happened that members of the Grateful Dead practiced with Larry, and they termed the word rocket yoga because when you're done, it makes you feel like you rocket off because this practice gives you so much energy. So that's where rocket yoga comes from. It has that fun connection to the Grateful Dead.
Rock it. All right, cool. Thank you. Okay, so you have some things that you want to do for fun, but not necessarily well that you put, temporarily said no to right now in order to focus. Really. All right, so we're about to wrap up. Kelly, for people today, tomorrow, 1,000 years from now, what message would you like to share with them?
That's a great question. So, my final words are follow your heart, find ways to always keep learning. Remember that human beings are extremely powerful beings. You have so many abilities within you that you could unlock. Remember that you are a sovereign being. You always have a choice. You can always unlock your superpowers. If you remember, Ramiro, I think the first question I asked you was, what is your superpower? So find your superpower. The world needs it, and the world needs you to be coming from and lead from the heart.
Beautiful. Find your superpower and lead from the heart. All right, Kelly, thank you. This was Story Legacy at Ramiro.me. So right now we're gonna end on a kapow. Are you ready, Kelly?
I'm ready.
You know how now?
Kapow!
All right.